about people are afraid of mathematics and they don't know enough about mathematics. And when she was growing up, she was trained where they were really studying mathematics and it's so important. Went on about that. And then she addressed the issue of testers at Facebook. She said, well, there are testers at Facebook, but like Google and like eBay, where my brother works, there's kind of a love-hate relationship there because they are very dominated by development and the way developers think. And that's always been the case. All through the history of computing, testers have been second-class citizens. And I think that makes perfect sense. I think it makes perfect sense that the people who, if they get sick, you can't ship the product, should be a little more important, thought of more highly than people who, if I get sick for 2 weeks, you can still ship the software, and maybe you won't find a bug that I otherwise would have found, but you can function without a dedicated tester. You can function without a dedicated HR person in your company. You're just running greater legal risk if you don't have HR people. You can function without people who clean the floors or fix the lights. There's all kinds of people who, if you get rid of them, you will still be able to function. We could close down the fire department and you will still be able to function. It's not like everything goes up in flames if you don't have a fire department. But that doesn't mean that those people aren't very important. It's just they're not the most important. It's just they're not absolutely fundamental and central. So, at companies like Google, eBay, Facebook, it's tough to get a lot of traction as a dedicated tester because the people who are in charge of that, they don't study testing. What they study a lot these days is Agile and DevOps. And Agile and DevOps was not created by testers. It wasn't created with testers in mind. And people who created them don't seem to have known anyone that they respect who are testers. The original Agile was created during the same period of time that I was trying to create a new kind of skilled software testing, a new class of testing craftsmen. I was trying to create that in 1993, 94, 95. That was when I was first getting out there and getting a message out there about skilled exploratory testing. Well, at the very same time, that's when Scrum was being developed and all that. That was a different community for me. We were all developers. Then around the early 2000s, my community of context-driven testers, skilled software testers, arrogant software testers, some would say, not me, but I recognize that there are people other than me in the world. We came across the Agilists and started having some high-level communications with them, and we started fighting with them. Right? There was a conference that was held at my lab in 2003 called the Agile Fusion Conference, where we had some leaders from the Agile world and leaders from the context-driven testing world, and we tried to fuse these things together. It was good for a few days, and then it dissolved in acrimony, and there was this big fight. And the fight was that these Agilists were saying, you really shouldn't be testers. You can imagine that the people who were there were dedicated to software testing, found that offensive. But they said, well, there shouldn't be specialists. And what we pointed out is, but you think everyone should be programmers. Yes, everyone should be programmers. That's a specialty. Well, it's not a specialty because we're programmers, so we don't consider it a specialty. Basically, what the response was is, it's a specialty if it's something that we don't know how to do. If we know how to do it, it's not a specialty. It's just a skill every one of our friends has. Can you see the bias there, right? So, a lot of Agilists, and this is true of people at Facebook and people at Google, they will say everyone should know how to do testing. But then you watch what they do, you watch what they focus on, they don't study testing. They study things like how to use a unit testing framework. That's not testing. That is interesting, and that's important, and that facilitates testing, absolutely, but it's not testing. The essence of testing is to gain critical distance from the thing that you are analyzing. Not to get super, super close to it and stay close to it, because that puts a fog in your mind. You have to get critical distance. It's exactly why when you're writing an article or a difficult email, you learn to ask a friend to look at it before you press the send button, so they can say, well, maybe you don't really want to send this quite yet. Sleep on it, because this could be offensive and that could be taken the wrong way. Or they find a typo that was right in front of your face the whole time, and as soon as they point it out, you go, oh, there's 2 ofs in a row. Why didn't I see that? You were so close to it, you knew what it was supposed to be, and you were letting that filter stop you from seeing reality. What testers do is they're supposed to give you critical distance, which is very, very hard to just snap your fingers and say, I am going to see this product for what it is. Very, very hard to do that. It's very, very hard to see your child for who your child really is. You know, a lot of you look pretty young in here. A few of you might be old enough to have children, perhaps. I have a 23-year-old son, and one of the toughest things is to recognize when your son is 20 that he's no longer 12. My wife accidentally ran into that problem the other day, where she was thinking of inviting my son to come to dinner with us and some friends, and then she said, oh, but he'll just go under the table. And by which she meant not that he will drink so much that he will go under the table, but that he would physically try to go to the table, which he did when he was 8. He would actually just not want to interact with people, but he would be happy to be under the table. But he grew out of that, but for a few moments, my wife forgot that he grew out of that, and that he is now a normal, social, adult man. And so he got upset hearing that, and then I had to have a talk with my wife, and we were just commiserating on how hard it is to see your grown-up child for a full human being that they have become. So it's similar when you are a developer and you are cheerleading and trying to say, let's do this, we can do this. The worst thing for a tester is to be a cheerleader, to say, quality is great, let's do this. You cannot simultaneously be a cheerleader and be a security guard against bad software. It's 2 completely different mindsets. It's 2 completely different emotional patterns. If I want to believe, as Agilists are supposed to believe, that quality is everyone's responsibility and we all just want to think positive, that interrupts very important patterns of suspicion that I need to maintain, or else certain possibilities just never come into my mind. You don't want the security people at the airport to say, come on, folks, let's have another great flight with no bombs. Come on. And the first step is to think positive. So we've dispensed with the metal detectors because they just assume that you want to blow things up. You need the security people to be thinking the worst. That's their job, so that nobody else has to think that way. So here's a big problem in our industry, and certainly it exists at Facebook and eBay. I know for a fact, and Google I know for a fact that it exists there. Is that not that there are no testers, but that testers are constantly being asked to justify their existence, and they're asked to justify their existence to people who don't study testing, and who are invited never to study testing, never to study human biases, never to study the negative effects of groupthink. And so what happens is stuff like, remember this scandal at Google? This is the kind of scandal that can routinely happen at Google, which they've got so much money they don't care. They can absorb this. but they had their Google Street View people going around, war driving. They weren't just taking pictures, they were also mapping unsecured Wi-Fi and getting a whole bunch of secret information as they were driving around. And the Federal Trade Commission sanctioned them for this. They ended up getting fined some amount of money. I think it was $25,000 they were fined for this, which is, it's like a fraction of a penny. They're just, well, can you break a $100,000 bill? The rest is a tip. They don't care. But I read the report on this that was issued, and apparently there were no testers on that project. There were several engineers who had read the spec, and nobody noticed or commented on the fact that it had these features which maybe somebody should have thought critically about. And if your attitude is, well, we'll just do things, and if it's against the public interest, then I guess the public is going to squawk, and I guess worst case scenario is to pay a few $1 million in the fine. Big deal. We've got billions and billions. We can absorb that. Well, then you can use that as an excuse for not hiring people who are professional critical thinkers, because there's no problem that you can't absorb. The big part of testers justifying themselves is to say, if you don't find these problems, we could be in big trouble. But if you can't, just like I suppose as a police officer or a fire guy would feel, I bet you that firefighters are kind of happy when there's a big fire, people dying. I mean, not that they don't want people to die or anything. It's not that. It's that they want people to appreciate what they do. And if you go long enough and no one dies in a fire, they start looking at you saying, well, you're costing us money, and really, what do you do? Well, I'm here just in case. Well, just in case what? Aliens attack? And this never happens. So you it's not that you want people to suffer, and if you ever saw people suffering, you would try to end that suffering immediately, but there is this kind of thing in your mind where you kind of hope that other people don't do their job so that they can appreciate when you do your job. I think that's true in every field. I think my wife feels that way about being a mother. She kind of likes stories about bad mothers so that she can say, see, son, I didn't do that to you, right? I'm better than that. You had a better upbringing. Acknowledge this to me, my son. Acknowledge this. And he acknowledges it, and she feels better. Okay, so that's life. That's life as a tester. It's a tough world for us as testers right now, and I think that a big thing that we have to do is we've got to learn to talk the language of DevOps. DevOps is taking over the world. I'm working with a company right now about that. I'm working with a company in Chicago that's very DevOpsy, and they have testers, but people are raising questions, saying there, why do we really need testers? What do testers really do? And what we need to do is train the testers. Each and every tester has to become able to explain testing to management. Now, in the old days, we had people to do that. They were called test managers. In the new world, test managers are being swept away. It's like a great plague. It's killed all the test managers. And that's because there are people who think managers don't do anything. A lot of Agile is based on people who were not managers who decided that managers don't do anything. It's kind of like, children defining a society saying, what are accountants anyway? What are lawyers? We don't need lawyers. We don't need accountants. We're never playing a game in the yard saying, uh-oh, you have to be the lawyer this time. I was the lawyer last time. No one cares about that. So they design a world with no lawyers. What happens when you have a world with no lawyers? Exactly what happened in the original democracy of Greece. Because in the original democracy, in ancient Greece, lawyers were illegal. You had to argue your own case. So what happened? Rich families hired people to teach their sons, because it was only ever the sons of these families that ended up on trial, and they had to train the sons to speak well, and even to memorize certain canned speeches, because you couldn't have a lawyer do that for you. You couldn't have a solicitor do that for you. It's Isn't that interesting? So everybody had to be their own advocate. And of course, it's probably better in the society for there to be a specialist class of people who are very good at advocacy, and you let them advocate for you instead of assuming that every single individual citizen is going to stand up equally well for their own rights. So it says same issue we're going through in testing right now is that middle management has been swept away, and you all are now learning that middle management actually had a whole bunch of things that they were doing. In the terms of testers, what were they doing? Middle management for testers prevents testers from being under debilitating pressure. I'll bet you, if you're in the DevOps kind of world right now, that you are dominated by the concept of the story, right? It's like, your test cases for the story. What about the next story? What about the next story? Go to Jira and look at what the open stories are. We got to close these stories so that we can get on. And have you ever tried to push back against that, saying, actually, I need to spend today just curating my test data? Curating your test data, that's not a story. It's got to be a story. Hurry up, test this, test this. You start to feel like you're on an assembly line. You're on an assembly line, you can't get off it. Now, I'm proud to say, today I'm proud, I wasn't proud when this happened, but in 1989, I almost caused a strike at Apple Computer. I almost stopped, single-handedly, all Macintosh production, which was in one site in Fremont, California, because I took a factory tour, and I was telling jokes about the people on the assembly line. I thought it was really amusing that these people were on the assembly line, and they had these anti-static strips that they were attached to so they wouldn't zap the electronics that looked to me like manacles. And I was saying things like, hey, where are the guys with whips to tell these guys to work faster? Doesn't it look like they're strapped there and they can't get away from the assembly line? That's funny. The next day, there were posters up all over Apple headquarters about the guy on the tour yesterday that didn't know who, but somebody was making offensive jokes in the direct hearing of the people working in the factory, and now there was a cluster of people in the factory in angry clumps threatening to stop all work unless I was found and punished. Okay? I almost fainted when I saw these posters. I was amazed at how accurately I was quoted too. They were like taking down everything that I was saying. What I didn't know is that these people actually felt like they were chained to the assembly line, and they resented it. They had like 5 minutes per hour for bathroom breaks. Meanwhile, the people in my side of Apple Computer, you could stay home from work a few days before people would notice you hadn't shown up. And then they would probably just kind of call and, somebody come in today? It's okay, it's cool. There was very lax on my side, and we're paid much more than those people on the assembly line. So there was this class division that I had no idea about. So I'm worried the testers are kind of becoming like the assembly line people, where unlike my early days at Apple Computer as a tester, where I was encouraged to learn systems thinking and to study new and different ways of creating test data, and the reaction I would get when I would have a new idea is, why don't you try it? Why don't you try it? And you need time to try these things. So I learned all kinds of wonderful stuff at Apple Computer and later at Portland International, and I learned to love testing because I had a string of bosses who were protecting me from get something valuable done today on the assembly line of your project. We didn't have that mentality back then. Agile has unfortunately, by dividing things into tiny little work units, has created this assembly line mentality, which you can easily push back against by citing the Agile Manifesto, but you have to have confidence in yourself, and you have to feel powerful enough. I can do that. I wade into this, and I can wave my hand, and people part before me. assuming that they even let me near their company or on their team. But if they do, they part before me. But that's what 33 years of experience gives you, is the feeling like, I know what I'm doing, I project that feeling, and other people agree, and we move on from there. So I might be blocked out of certain people's teams because they don't want someone who's assertive to be around. They only want to hire people who are good little boys and girls and do what you're told. Maybe some of you are on your projects right now because you don't make trouble. Maybe. I do know this. I know that anytime I went to Spotify, I went to Skype, and they have this big open plan offices just like they are out there. Within 30 seconds, I'm getting shushed. Oh, you're so loud. Hey, I thought you wanted all the walls to go away because you want everybody to hear everybody. Isn't that the whole point? Isn't that the whole point of having us all in the same room? Because we're all supposed to be working together, right? Oh, except for me. You don't want to hear from me. Well, how do you feel about all your coworkers? And I look around and everyone's got earbuds too, right? So we're all here, one big happy family, not listening to each other. That's what it's all about. And Spotify, if you go there, if you visit there, maybe it's true here too, I don't know. But there, you can never get a conference room because they're always full. Because everybody is desperately trying to find a space where you can actually talk to each other, and you can't actually talk to each other in the big open spaces. All right, so I have taken that question, you see, because that question is so fundamental. It touches on so many things. And I've used it to open up a whole bunch of doors. Now I'm going to let anyone else ask another question or direct me to somewhere else, and we'll see what doors that opens up. Yes?
One question I had was around in a team where the release has already happened and it's already in production. There are not many bugs coming in.
Yeah.
There are not many new developments coming in, right?
Yeah.
So in that team, what would the role of a tester be in terms of exploratory testing?
Do you have a name for that process?
How do you mean?
Do you have a name for testing something in production?
Production test, I mean, test in production you mean? Or,
Is that what you call it? You call it test in production? That's your name for it?
we don't really call it anything.
I'm going to give it a name then. At eBay, they use the term live site testing. And I like that. That's a nice, catchy term, live site testing. It's also known as TIP, test in production, but I think live site testing is a nicer sounding term. I think that live site testing is very important, and it needs to become kind of a subspecialty in testing. Here's the thing, it's very true for your company. I've worked a lot with eBay because my brother works there, so I've given him a lot of free consulting. I've taught classes with my brother John. He looks a lot like me, except I have hair and he doesn't. And he has the ability to love and I don't. So that's how you tell us apart. My brother is so charming. He is so friendly to everybody all the time. It's like that Star Trek episode with the evil Kirk and the friendly Kirk. That's he and I are like opposites like that. So at eBay they call it live site testing, and my brother used to be in charge of live site testing at eBay, so that's how I know about this. So I bet a lot of the same dynamics work for you. And the key thing with live site testing is that you're testing something which is also being used by real people, so you're in a race. You're in a race to find the big bugs before it becomes a big deal when your users find it. And you often lose the race, so what you try to do is to come in as soon as you can after a user has already found the bug. And that means that the big part of the live site testing process, if you're going to do it well, is continuously monitoring the reputation of your service. You got to monitor Twitter for keywords of people saying it's down, it doesn't work, it sucks, that kind of thing. And you need to be watching the feedback forms that usually nobody reads. The testers should be the people who are reading feedback forms on these pages. A lot of times in DevOps, you're going to hear developers saying, why don't I need testers? I get feedback directly from users. And one of my response to that is, really? Have you read feedback from users?
Yeah, I mean,
Have you actually read that feedback? Because I think as a developer, your reaction is, what? That guy's just an idiot. But if you're a tester, you go, this is not a coherent bug report, but maybe there's something to it. Why don't I look into it?
So that only happens when, say, for example, if you are monitoring through Kibana or any of the monitoring tools, if you find a disparity or if you find the graph going, off, you actually investigate and see what's going on, right? That does happen. But other than that, inside a team, from a pure exploratory testing role, the tester would not have much work, right? So just asking how, other than the monitoring bug part, is there something else that one should consider?
There's two sides of it. One is leveraging the fact that your users are having experiences, and some of those experiences are relevant to your testing process. The other side of it is actually testing it yourself. Testing yourself independent of whatever the users are doing. And that is informed by what you know about the users, how they use the product, what might be going on, whatever you think the technical risks are. You've got to be getting that stuff going. Now, this is not anything like automation and automated checking. And I make a distinction between checking and testing. And I think all professional testers need to, whether you use this language or not, you need to understand that there's a very big difference between fact-checking and testing. Anyone who doesn't understand that there's a difference between fact-checking and testing is destroying their job security as a tester and destroying the basis to be respected as a tester. Because what you're saying is, well, all I am is a fact checker, and any computer can check facts, so all I am is just a person who happens to be here until someone gets around to making a computer program that does what pushes the buttons that I push. Well, but that's not what I do as a tester. I am not simply click on this, click on this, click on this. That should be 498. Yes, it is 498. Move on. That is the smallest of what I do as a tester. But what I do as a tester is I interact with the product and I notice things. For instance, I notice, wait a minute, this seems a little slower than it seemed yesterday. I wonder why. And then I begin to investigate. Or I say, this isn't how the screen looked the other day. Oh, maybe this is an A-B test. How would I know if it were an A-B test? Let me look into that. Or I'm interacting and I say, it just occurred to me that someone could have several open sessions at once, and they can have an open session on their mobile, and then they could try to finish the transaction on their desktop. I don't know if we've really looked at that. Let me look into it right now. It just occurred to me. And that's what exploration is all about. What exploratory testing, which I'm famous for talking about for many years, I no longer use the term exploratory testing unless someone brings it up. Because for me, all testing is exploratory testing. So if I say testing, I mean exploratory testing. Scripted testing is fact-checking. And fact-checking is an important part of testing, but it's only part of testing. And I use tools to help you with that. Just like a spider uses a spider web to help catch food, but a spider web without a spider catches no food at all. Or at least whatever it catches doesn't become food. It needs the spider to operate the spider web, or else you just get a bunch of twigs and sticks and dirt and stuff. And maybe the odd bug that doesn't get eaten is going to get stuck in there. The spider has to operate its web, and I operate my tools. The tools are not doing testing. The tools are helping me do testing. So that's my attitude about that. So all testing is exploratory. And what I mean when I say exploratory is that I'm using my social competence. And here's a key term. Social competence. That's what distinguishes you from your tools. You have social competence. And machine learning doesn't have social competence either, by the way. So even machine learning is not going to replace your social competence. Now, how does social competence relate to testing? It relates to testing because as you interact with the product, as you learn about the product, as the product changes, or as it doesn't change, as you become more deeply aware of how the product works, you are constantly relating that to how important is this to my clients. And that requires social competence. You've got to have to constantly evaluate, this is more important to test than that. This data is more important than that data. This result is going to discourage more users than that result will. And that is not a process that we can reduce to an algorithm. Now, of course, algorithms can help. We can do A/B testing, we can do statistical experiments, and we can say, in general, screens that have more blue in them are more popular than screens that have more green in them. You can certainly do that kind of reasoning. But it still takes that data scientist, the imagination of what the possibilities and what the variables are, what the possible confounding variables are, and what the possible extenuating circumstances are. All of that requires social competence. So when you are doing that exploratory testing, you're not just testing without a script. You're testing with a rich inner model of the product. That's what you're doing. You're developing a rich, powerful model of the product, a mental model of the product, by which you reason about what little mysteries need to be followed up on and what little mysteries you can safely ignore. Because you have to ignore so much. Which things to ignore becomes the real skill set. Now, I can't walk into your company right now and test your product and immediately know what things can be ignored or not. It takes weeks, potentially months, to develop such a finely tuned sense. Those of you who've been working here for weeks and months and have been involved with the product, if I were to interview you, I'm sure you could tell me some very interesting things about, counterintuitive notions. Actually, this kind of thing is more what people are trying to search for. We get more complaints about this than that, strangely enough, so I like to focus on this test data set, because that, in the long run, looks like it's the best thing for us to focus on, blah, 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 blah. You acquire that over time, and not just over time by yourself, but in conversation with all these other people. That's how you're developing and maintaining your social competence. And I think that your role as you test something that's in the field is partly a one eye on how people are reacting, one eye on social media, and your other eye on the technology of it, and you try to bring those things together by directing your attention to the most sensitive, most interesting aspects of the product as you go along. This morning, before I came here, somebody showed me an interesting new feature where you take a picture of somebody and then you use the picture search feature. And we thought it was fascinating. We were trying to get it to focus on my hat. So at first you took a regular picture of me and it was showing all kinds of plaid stuff. Like, okay, no hats. Then it focuses in on my head and it's all about glasses then. Okay, so no hats, but glasses. So then I took off my glasses. He takes a picture of me. A little bit of hat, but mostly it's just a bunch of heads, What is it about hats that this thing doesn't like? Is it not trained on hats? So this is maybe a mystery that we begin to unravel. Is that there are some kinds of hats that are more searchable than others? Does the site have a bias against hats for some reason? And what do you trace this back to? Is it traced back to the training set? And all through this, what I as a tester would be doing is I'd be learning all about machine learning. I'd be becoming more and more of an expert on machine learning in general. At the same time, I'm trying to investigate why it seems to behave the way it does and what other articles of clothing it might also behave that way about. And then I'm also bringing other variables. What if it knows more about me? What if it knows that I am a male and not a female? What if it knows that I'm 50 years old and not 20 years old? Is it going to change its search? Should it change its search based on that? If I'm shopping for someone who's young but I'm older, is it going to show me something different? I think it should. I would investigate whether it has that. So if the feature is already shipping, then I'm going to continually be asking questions. I'll be generating enhancement requests. And I'll be comparing all as I go, everything I'm thinking about with what people are saying about this on Twitter, on every feedback forum that I can come across. I wouldn't just let the customer service people be in on this. In fact, here's what I would do. If I'm a tester, I make all the customer service people my friends. I always go to the customer service people and say, have you ever wanted to have a louder voice on the development team? Have you ever wished that you could influence the development team? I am the doorway to that. I can help you, and you can help me. I need the information that you have, customer service professional, and you need my insider's position on the team. Let's work together and help each other be better. This is also a job my brother has done at eBay, so I know something about how a huge media-related company handles this. And usually these customer service people are in like an entirely different geographical location. They feel totally cut off. They're wondering, what the heck are those people doing over there? They never listen to us. So as soon as somebody decides to be a bridge between these organizations, that's wonderful, and that can lead to lots of great stuff. Unfortunately, you don't always get much management support for this. But that's the lot in life that we have when we are in the position of supporting a team rather than being the central person on the team, is that you always have to fight for management support. Well, that was fun. You see, I just love monologuing, yes?
With your highlighted the critical thinking.
Yes.
With the move recently within ASOS maybe to ATD, where you start sharing, developing, and cross-scaling. How do you maintain that critical distance? Like, so you have that, maybe that you can see your child is, something happening with your child.
Well, it's going to end up being a personal discipline, because they're probably putting you on the team. You're not a separate test team. Yeah, so you don't have that kind of physical distance. Here's the two things you need to consider. This is really interesting when you unfeel this in your mind. Critical distance versus social distance. Social distance is, generally speaking, bad. Critical distance is, generally speaking, good. So we want to reduce social distance while increasing critical distance. But the problem is, these two things are like prisoners that are chained together with a bungee cord. So if you increase your critical distance, you say, I am going to be relentlessly honest in my criticisms, spare no one's feelings. What happens then is the social distance increases because people don't want you to be in on the meeting because you're constantly saying bad stuff. So they start having little conversations amongst themselves and cut you out of it. And so now the social distance begins to increase. But if you say, I never want anyone to feel judged when they're around me, and I want to be everyone's best friend, now you end up giving up the critical distance because you just want to hear everyone's innermost thoughts. And it's a lot like being a dental hygienist, where you can cause a huge amount of pain with one little misstep. There's a lot of trust involved with the, if you're going to let someone in there with this steel pick, you got to trust that they went to school or something. If someone just said, I've never done this before, but I'll volunteer, I'll clean your teeth, To me, that's a little like someone saying, I've never tested before, sure, I'll test your product. Like, do you know how not to hurt my feelings if I'm the developer, or are you just going to stomp all over my feelings with your, oh, booyah, I found another crash. If you high-five another tester in the presence of the developer, think about the message that gives to them. I always have to remind the developers, I'm not excited because I found that you made a mistake. I'm excited because today I know that I'm useful. And not every day do I feel useful. But when when, you know, a fire happens and I can put the fire out, I'm, as a fireman, going like, yeah, yes, a fire. Okay, but you probably don't want to say that in front of the homeowner who just lost their cat, you know. So there's social competence. There are many dimensions of it, and one of them is to look at how we are seen. So social distance, bad. Want to minimize social distance. That's why they took the separate teams away, because they said let's eliminate social distance. But what they ignored then is how that causes critical distance to also collapse. So how you have to create critical distance is you've got to try to do it inside your own mind through a discipline that you've developed. But even that is difficult because all of the social support structures that you need to create that discipline are absent because the test manager is gone. Do you have a test coach? If you have a test coach, that person can help you with the critical distance. You have a lead QA, so it's that lead QA job to help you maintain your critical distance through pep talks, through actually giving you specific techniques for doing that, through explaining to other people to allow you to raise questions. That's his job. His job is to raise questions. One problem I have, though, with what you said you're doing AT. That whole Gojo stuff, if you've read his book, the specification-driven development book, which is all this AT stuff in it. There's one line in that book where as soon as I read that line, I wanted to throw the book out the window. I couldn't read the book anymore. The guy just said, oh, well, hey, at a certain point, all these acceptance tests are just become the specification. And that is a fundamental misunderstanding of what a specification is and what testing is. Because testing is all about critique. And specification is all about saying, what do we want? And a critique is never, what do we want? Those are fundamentally different things. A specification is to say something like, this product should add this number to that number and get a correct result. That cannot be a test. That is a principle. A test is a specific instance of, well, how about this number? How about that number? Is it correct? But if someone says, wait, but if you have a whole bunch of those tests, it's the same as the spec. No, because the spec is supposed to be true in an infinity of situations, but each specific check of that is only one situation, so they're not equivalent. In other words, the principle that you should not murder somebody is not equivalent to me checking each day whether today you've murdered somebody. If we go like, oh, it's just the same thing. I just check each day, have you murdered someone today? No, I haven't. Well, that's the same thing as the principle that thou shalt not kill, right? Well, obviously it isn't the same thing. Because you can kill somebody at lunch and I would never know. So, that certainly violates the principle of thou shalt not kill, but it's not going to be caught by my set of tests, which only ask you what you've done at breakfast. Okay? So it's just a profoundly misunderstood notion that a set of acceptance tests that are passed means that the product is good. And that's the basic misunderstanding that it seems that people get into. I passed all the acceptance tests, therefore it's acceptable. Is exactly the same thing as asking somebody, are you going to commit a crime today? And if they say no, you go, well, therefore you are a law-abiding citizen because you answered no to that question. And that is flat out fundamentally not true. Yes?
James, on that point then, so as a tester, what I want to do is I want to find the things which are not necessarily that easy to find, but for us, we've got millions of customers, somebody's going to find them.
Yeah.
Those acceptance tests, I believe, are useful for me as an indicator of how testable a product is. Are they not some measures by which, as a tester, I want to make sure that our acceptance test coverage is good? I want to play a part in that so that it helps me be more
Yeah.
productive with my testing time.
I'm glad that you brought this up because a better way for me to talk about this is to bounce off of reactions like that. Because it covers the topic much better. Because this enables me to say, absolutely they're useful. Absolutely, of course I want fact checks about the product, which check very fundamental facts about the product, such as, is it ever possible for the product to do this? I want to know that. That's part of my testing. So when I'm complaining about this, I'm not complaining about the fact of having fact checks that cover really interesting bits of the product. That's not what I was complaining about. What I was complaining about is the attitude that says that these are acceptance tests. They're not acceptance tests. I am not going to accept the product if none of these fail. Acceptance is about an assessment from a critical perspective that makes use of information, of course, from many sources, including a whole set of wonderful fact checks. But I'm not going to call these things acceptance tests, and that's what I'm saying. It's dangerous to consider them as acceptance tests. If you got to call them anything.
But James, is it not, as a tester, can I not use the term acceptance to mean the product is now in an acceptable state to test?
Well, if you're very clear that everybody...
I'm just asking whether or not...
First of all, it's not horrible to say, okay, this means acceptance into testing. It's not horrible to say that, but I don't even want to say that because I am happy to test things that don't pass all the acceptance tests. So, I just won't. There's certain things I might not test if the product isn't robust enough for me to go and do that because they need to fix that before my additional feedback is going to be helpful to them. So maybe a failure of a certain kind of fact check is going to mean I'm not going to worry about that. It's already broken enough, and they're already working on it. So I'll wait on that. But this other stuff, where those checks have not failed, I'm going to work on that. I'm just saying that it's really important for you as testers to understand what we call the logic of verification. The logic of verification works basically like this. You can only verify something that has a truth value to it. And good enough to ship is not a true-false thing. There's no truth value to that. You can assess if something is good enough to ship, but you cannot verify. It's like this. If I ask you your name, tell me your name. Say it again. Say it slowly. Manikinda.
Yeah.
Okay. Manikinda is your name.
Yeah.
All right. Now I have just verified that Manikinda is your name. I have done a very simple kind of verification. I can do a deeper verification, look at your passport, and find out if that's really your name. But that is a verifiable fact, because that has a truth value. Either it's your name or it's not your name. Then you could come up with a situation where it is neither your name nor it isn't your name, and that's true. But for most of us, most of the time, we can do that verification. It's not controversial. But if I'm trying to verify that you have a good name, that's not a matter of fact. That isn't a true or false. There's arguments that that could be a good name. There's arguments it could be a bad name. We could argue about that, perhaps. We could look into your heritage. We could look at great heroes that have that name and say, you really want to be associated with that hero? Oh, you do? Okay, good. Well, then you have the name of a great hero. Is your grandfather's name that name? You know, maybe that's makes sense. We can talk about why you would have a name or not, but it's not something that's a matter of verification. It's a matter of assessment. If you have a forensic psychologist, and the forensic psychologist is trying to find out if a particular defendant is competent to stand trial, that person does not perform a verification. That person performs a psychological assessment. It's called an assessment, not a verification. Because again, it's not a matter of fact, it's a matter of opinion, which brings together lots of facts. So let's be clear on this. When you do automated fact checking, where you use an algorithm to operate the product in a certain way, and then you see a certain result, you can verify that this result is or is not what it should be in many cases. In machine learning, it's a little bit more difficult to figure out, well, is this what it should have been or not? Because there's a statistical relationship there. But in most of the checking I'm talking about, we're talking about a result that you get, and there's a verifiable result, and that's verification. But no number of verifications adds up to an assessment. Because assessment introduces a new ingredient, which is beyond fact, and that is judgment. Human judgment. Social competence is what you add to a group of facts to come up with a competent assessment of the quality of the product. So when you have your ATDD stuff, first of all, when you're creating it, you need to use social competence to choose what those results should be. And you have hope, productive conversations about what the expected results should be. And those conversations involve lots of social competence. Then once you make those decisions, you can enshrine them in algorithms that you automate and you call your ATDD test. But what you have to guard against is what's called goal displacement. You know what goal displacement is?
No.
Is that not a term that is familiar to you? All right, here's an example of goal displacement so that you can get. I love this example. I learned about it in a book I read in 1990 called Wicked Problems and Righteous Solutions. One of the first agile kind of books that anyone ever wrote. And here was the situation. Imagine a restaurant that has salt shakers, and they don't want the patrons to run out of salt, so they fill up the salt shakers every day. But they put so much salt in the salt shakers, you can't get any salt out. It's jammed in there. That's an example of goal displacement. The goal of making sure you have salt has been displaced by a tactic that was supposed to be correlated with that goal, but became uncorrelated with it. I have been a victim of my own goal displacement many times as a technical software tester. Because I'm testing the software I'm supposed to test, and I go, cool, I just thought of this great tool that I should write that would supercharge my testing. Oh, this is going to be so cool. And all my friends are going to say, you are the god of testing when I show them this tool. And so I start writing the tool, and then I go, oh, I can make it even better. And I think of a new feature, and I add that to it, and I go, oh, but before I show them, I'm going to do this other thing to it. And then I'm going to hook it into Google Charts, and then it'll have automatic charting. And then 5 days later, I'm ready with my tool, and somebody asks me, so what bug could we find with this that we wouldn't already have found just by exploring the product for 5 minutes? And that happened to me once, and my reaction was, need a little time to find an answer to that question because I forgot why I'm doing this in the first place. It's cool though, isn't it? The particular example I'm thinking about was when I was running a test team in '97, and one of the guys who worked for me said this to me while I was demonstrating it to the CEO. I just thought it's intuitively obvious that we want to visualize performance somehow, so I'm sure it's useful. But meanwhile, I had lost touch with that practical last step, and I shouldn't have. And I'm glad that this guy brought this up. I wish he hadn't brought it up in front of the CEO, but I respect that it happened, and we turned it into a big joke and a learning lesson, right? A lesson which is, hey, tools are fun, but let's keep ourselves grounded. Let's not work too many days on a tool without asking really fundamental questions, such as, how is this going to be useful? And if we don't know how it's going to be useful, let's just admit that. We think this is a productive exploration, that it might not come to anything, but we want to pursue it anyway because maybe it will turn out to be cool, and let's admit that. So goal displacement is a big problem, and what I'm worried about with ATDD is goal displacement, because you have these conversations, you create these things, and then people go, all right, well, if we pass that, then that means the product is good. And it has to be good because it does all these things. And what we have to keep reminding people is in between the spaces of each thing that we see here is an almost infinite space where it could have failed and we won't know. So we can't treat these individual points as the entirety, but we can treat it as interestingly suggestive. Here's what it means. When all of your ATDD stuff passes, what you can say is, we now know that the product can work. We don't know if it will work, but we know it can work. Because if even one of these things fails, we can say, well, we have evidence that this part of the product cannot function. Or would it function in this case? But having passed them all doesn't mean that the product is good. It just means we don't yet know if it's bad. So I keep having to remind people, and you need to remind people, that's what that regression stuff means. That's what that acceptance stuff means. It's a detector of badness, but not a detector of goodness, of sufficient goodness. It's cannot be used in that way. That requires more sampling over time, social competence, following your nose when you see little clues that something might be going wrong, because your software never follows clues. It is ignorant of clues. All right, anyone else? Yes?
Yes, I had several questions, but I have more.
Okay, yeah, I figured that.
Because you answer some of those.
Okay.
I think people, when I listen to someone that speaks and says, I got these and these ideas, I got my critical thinking alarm going off. I believe your ideas are excellent. I've read many of yours. But my question would be, how did you critical think your thoughts about testing?
How do I critically think my thoughts about testing?
Yes, is your theory about context software testing evolved?
Oh, yeah.
Is Agile all bad because people listen to examples and think the example as a whole? And also I would like to know how you evolve this critical thinking about your ideas.
All right.
Agile testing is good, some good things.
Okay. Well, the first thing is that I have a collegial network of people who I've chosen because they're willing to argue with me. It's really hard to find people willing to argue with you because most people feel that argument is a bad thing. They feel icky when they're involved in a debate. Many people. Here's something that happened to me. Okay, this is a true story. So I want to illustrate this true story. I was once debating with this female breakfast companion, the subject of should tobacco companies be allowed to advertise or should they be barred from advertising. I was on the side of laissez-faire capitalism. They should be allowed to advertise. She was on the side against tobacco companies, and we were having an argument. Now, you need to know about her. She was a delegate to the 1968 Democratic National Convention. She started her own television station in Los Angeles in the 70s. She is a concert pianist, a model, and an actress who worked with Frank Sinatra. And she was, I believe, a negotiator for the Academy of Film Sciences. So she's very politically active, very accomplished lady. And so I'm arguing with her, and at a certain point, she got up from the table, exploded into tears, and ran away. And at the time, I was 15 years old, and she was 45. She was my stepmother. And I was shocked Because all through that argument, I was having the greatest of times. It was just fun for me. And I only realized that moment that for her, it was some sort of life and death struggle, and I was some abusive man that was attacking her. She was so angry with my father that he didn't protect her from me. And that was a really important event in my life. One of the events where I realized I enjoy arguing and many other people don't. But all through that, I'm just thinking, I'm dealing with a powerful person. So there's no possible way I'm going to hurt her feelings by doing this because she's so powerful compared to me. And that was an important event. Now that event has been reproduced since then. Many times, except now I am often the one who is 20 years older than the other person at the table instead of the other way around. And I'm male, and I have a loud voice, and so I have all these kinds of social factors, which mean that I either have to be very careful and have to pull my punches with most people, or I'm going to have a very bad outcome. Now, one good thing on my side is that I'm married to someone for 26 years who is an introvert who barely speaks. And so I've had to adapt to her. So I have to become very quiet when I'm at home. And in any kind of difficult conversation with her, I have to practice being silent. And I got to leave lots and lots of space for her to choose to express herself or not. And I have completely agreed to and accepted that is the way things are. With her, it's not easy for me to do that so much with strangers, but I can do some of it because I have developed the skills of holding myself back. But what I had to do is I had to develop a collegial network of people that I can be myself with completely, that I can go nuts with, and I know I won't be frightening them. I know they can tell me to shut up if they need to. I have a client right now in Chicago I'm working with who is wonderful at that. She's fantastic at that. She's so bossy. I feel like she's this just task mistress for me in my work with her. And I love that. And we joke about this because I really need to feel that I can be fully, frankly honest with somebody. And sometimes I get emotional. And I need someone who's just not worried about that at all. Doesn't want to hide under a table or anything. And I understand why most people want to do that, but I so cherish people who say, as she has said to me, I'll go along with you every time, as long as you convince me with your argument, she said. That's exactly what I want. I want you to be convinced with my argument, or do not give in. Do not give in. Maybe we'll get tired and we'll decide to stop arguing. But I never want anyone to go along with me just because I wore them down. That's fear that I have. That is, I live in a fantasy world because people around me don't want to say what's on their mind. So I've developed a collegial network, and I try to get them to help me think critically. But it's that issue with social distance and critical distance. In order to be on my collegial network, you already have to have some philosophical harmony with me, or I'm not even going to have you. You're not even going to want to be on my committee of dedicated arguers. So that's a method, but it's not a very strong method for helping me think critically. So another thing that I need to do is to encounter people who have a very different philosophy, and I need to debate with them. I've tried to do this on Twitter, but Twitter turns out to be a pretty bad way to do it. I like arguing on Twitter, but again, lots of other people think they're being abused or bullied when I argue with them on Twitter, so that's just how they feel. So I just decided that I have to take it very easy on Twitter. My friends have begged me to stop tweeting, and I have mostly stopped tweeting. I don't even have Twitter on my phone anymore. I don't have it on my iPad. I just reply to people who reply to me. and that's it. So that has not been, and for a while I felt really good about Twitter because I got into some great arguments that led to having to writing papers and that sort of thing. But another thing that I do is people comment on my blog posts and I argue with them there. I go to conferences and I sometimes see other people's talks and then I find things to argue about there. But again, I found that if you argue with them in public, then it freaks a lot of people out. It's too bad. We need to have conferences that admit that allow people to argue, but we just don't. And I think a lot of that is just young people especially have trouble with that these days because there's so much focus on, I guess, bullying, and then people confuse honest debate about important issues with I'm being repressed. You know? So it's just part of the social reality that we live with, that the world doesn't have a whole lot of tolerance for critical thinking. And I have to admit that once in a while, when I think I'm critical thinking, I later come to believe that I was really abusing somebody. So that has happened, that I have reconsidered certain earlier statements that I have made. I've come to be aware, I came to be aware basically most of it based on my first marriage and all that I learned from that somebody can love you, and because they love you, they can say things that they think you want to hear, but not what the real truth is for them. And so that means that you can't put it all on them. You have to make a space for them. It's just, if you want the truth, you've got to make a space for them. It's just a head scratcher sometimes. How much space should I make for you to invite you to do that? And here's a heuristic I'm going to use, which might be a heuristic that you disagree with, but it's a heuristic I use. If you're male, I give you less space. I assume that you are more willing to argue with me, but I assume that females are less willing to go toe-to-toe, nose-to-nose with me. So I just tend to try to make a safer space for females than for males. And maybe that's sexist, but I think that's the world we live in. So I think it's a good thing for me to do. Anyway. So that's one thing. Another thing that I do is I study social science. And social science is full of warnings about biases. So I encourage everybody, read about social science. Read about, here's a little term for you, naturalistic inquiry. There's a famous author by the name of Guba, G-U-B-A, who writes about naturalistic inquiry. And in naturalistic inquiry, what you get is lots of critique of hard science. Lots of talk about how scientific facts are socially constructed, which doesn't mean that there isn't such a thing as heat or electrons or whatever. It just reminds you that when people express facts, talk about physical facts, they emphasize certain things and de-emphasize other things, and that's a social construct. That's a social decision. And it doesn't mean there's no such thing as facts, but it does mean that people frame facts in lots of different ways to make lots of different subtle points about reality. And we just need to keep that in mind. So if you read about naturalistic inquiry, you'll read lots of warnings about that, of how the researcher could imprint his own expectations into the data. Simply by deciding to shine a light here instead of shining a light there, that introduces a bias. So I read about that, and my colleagues are up to speed on that, so that we're constantly challenging each other. And here's one phrase you'll hear amongst us if you overheard one of our conversations. You would hear one of us saying to the other, what are the threats to validity of that idea? Because threats to validity is a phrase in science that's supposed to trigger you to list the different things you didn't test for, to list the variables you haven't examined, that you think probably don't invalidate your research, but possibly could. So it is an important part of the discipline to list those things. You asked me, is there anything good about Agile? There's tons that are good about Agile. I love the humanism of Agile. I love the fact that Agile has a learning theory that's built into it. It recognizes that when, unlike the stupid V model that was talked about for years, and people aren't really talking about the V model anymore. Do you know about the V model? You don't even know about the good for you. You don't need to know about that stupid V model. I used to say I want to meet the person who came up with the V model so I could punch him in the nose. So that's maybe some abusive talk, I guess. But I was joking, but only a little bit joking. The V model was this waterfall-y kind of thing, which made all kinds of assumptions. And one of the assumptions is that when you're building something, you always know what you're building before you build it. No, I don't. And the second thing it assumes is if I give you a spec, you read the spec and then you understand the spec. That's never how it works. In fact, I will tell you this, if anyone here feels secretly stupid because you are given a spec, or you're given a story, and you read it, and you go, I really don't understand what this is all about. Stop it. Just stop feeling stupid about that. The difference between you and me is simply that I read this stuff, and I don't understand it, and I know that that's normal, and I'm really smart. And it's not the document that's necessarily bad. What's bad is the expectation that you can read something and just understand it, because it's written in English after all. I know this because I have written very detailed specs. I once wrote something in Bacchus-Mauer format, which is a way of formally describing a grammar. And I wrote the spec that had the formally specified grammar for a certain data file. I remember coming back to that very same document a few years later and thinking, what was I thinking? I should have only done this on the last page of the spec. I shouldn't have just presented this and said, now it's clear to you what the grammar is. Because I'm reading my own grammar, and I've got a whole bunch of questions about it, and it's going to take me a long time to it's kind of like some sort of bouillon cube that you have to boil for 45 minutes before it becomes soup. It might feel really efficient. This is an efficient food form, except it takes so long to process it that maybe it would be better just to store the soup in a can where you can just heat it quickly. And similarly, you can have a beautifully written spec that's technically accurate that is very, very difficult for people to process. So what I love about Agile is it acknowledges that we only gain our idea of what goodness is over time through a process of learning, and that learning can never happen instantaneously. Yes, exactly. So that's why any model of development that says, I create a spec, you read the spec, now you know everything, and then you do the next step, that's always a fantasy. That's never how it works. Right now, I wrote right now meaning 2 weeks ago, I delivered a 17-page set of recommendations to a management group at a company like yours, and they looked at it, and they agreed to the recommendations. And my attitude about that is, I'll bet they didn't even read it. I'll bet if they read it, they didn't understand it. And I fully expect that 3 weeks from now, someone is going to finally realize that my recommendations don't have some sacred cow that he values, and he's going to say, whoa, we can't do that. And instead of saying, you already agreed to the recommendations, I'm going to say, all right, so now can we talk about the recommendations? Let's make sure we understand this. And I've already told everybody involved in that situation that I fully expect that some of their objections to this will emerge over time only as they see what the implementation looks like. This is not a speak now or forever hold your peace situation. This is a situation where it's going to unfold over time. That's the nature of these things. I just keep saying that over and over again. And we're trying to make an open, safe space for people to belatedly criticize what I wish they could have understood and criticized on day one. But I'm too old and experienced to actually expect people to do that. So that's what I like about Agile. A built-in theory of learning, loops instead of straight lines. It's humanist. I love that. In fact, I have no problem with any of the Agile Manifesto stuff. I'm a signature with another priesthood, and that's my big problem, because I want to get rid of the priesthood. And you might think, that's funny, James, because aren't you a priest? Aren't you a priest of testing? How could you be wanting to get rid of the priesthood? Well, I'm a special kind of priest of testing. The way that I proceed when I teach testing is I always tell people that my goal is not to get you to agree with me or to believe what I say. My goal is to help you become complete, to have integrity in your own thoughts. And to do that, I will challenge your thinking. I will challenge your thinking. And of course, I think that my ideas are the best ideas of all. Yes, I think that I have the best ideas. If I didn't have the best ideas, I would change them. I keep changing the ideas so that I think I have the best set of ideas. And yet, I know that just as no one can say I have the best ideas and try to push them onto me without me chewing them little by little, digesting them, and then reconstituting them into my own psyche, I cannot expect to do that to anybody else. So I will make my best case, and I will challenge you with exercises, and then you will construct in your own mind your own wisdom, and I'm hoping that it's good, that it's something that I would consider to be good, but if not, then all I ask is that you have integrity within your own beliefs and challenge them with critical thinking methods and have a collegiality about it so that you're open to argument. And I think that's the best world we can hope for. So I try to live up to that. Yes?
Hi, how important do you think it is for QAs to have an influence on quality management principles, like changing process and refining process?
Well, I think the question kind of answers itself, because QA, if it means quality assurance or quality assistance, which is kind of what I prefer, seems to require that. If quality is going to be your focus. Well, personally, I'm not QA, I'm a tester. So if you consider yourself a tester, it's a little different. If you consider yourself actually QA, then it seems to me you are saying that I am interested in principles by which quality becomes quality. How does quality come to be, and what can I do to maximize that? The thing about that is, I think that if you really care about quality, then what you really are saying is you care about craftsmanship, because that's where quality comes from. Quality comes from the craftsmanship of the developers, primarily. It comes from other things too, but if you don't have good craftsmanship among the people who are developing and designing the product, I'm going to lump designers in with development here, then you're not going to have quality. You're just never going to have it, unless you have people who can create that. Just as if you want to compose a great symphony, and you've got these incredible symphony critics working with you, but you don't know how to compose music. You're just not going to get a very good symphony out of that. You got to have the craftsmanship of the Beethoven in order to have Beethoven's Ninth or something like it. You can't be not very good at that and somehow come out with something equivalent to Beethoven's Ninth. So to me, someone who says, I'm really a QA person, I would expect you to focus on craftsmanship. How do you create craftsmanship? How do you encourage craftsmanship? How do you create a space where craftsmanship can thrive? Which basically means that you have to become a developer expert. And you may need to just be a developer. But I don't consider myself a quality person. I consider myself a tester. And what a tester does is to try to see the truth. My job isn't to create quality. My job is to help you see the truth so you can create quality. I help the people who actually create quality, and those people are developers and management. Those two groups are the people who make quality possible. Management creates the environment, and then the development people occupy that environment, and then other people help to some degree. And of course, I as a tester, I contribute to. I have an opinion about what's good or bad, and I might contribute my opinion, but my opinion doesn't mean any more, it shouldn't have any more weight than anyone else's opinion. As a tester, in fact, I pride myself in saying my opinion about quality has no weight whatsoever. As a tester, when my testing hat is on, I have no opinion about quality. The only thing I have an opinion about is reality. And I need to see things clearly. I need to cast light on the situation so that I can see things clearly and so that everyone else can see things clearly. That's my job. So I think quality assurance is hard. It's difficult, and if I were a manager of projects or a developer, I would have to focus a lot on that. If I was a coach of developers and a coach of managers, then I would be all about quality, craftsmanship, and all that. So as it is, I stay out of that because I'm a tester. Any other? Yes. Yes, you have a second.
In agile environment, how important is it to produce test artifacts and test execution metrics? Is it necessary, or you can just bypass it?
I don't think it's necessary fundamentally. I think it has some small necessity. I just am very worried about artifacts because artifacts are expensive. And artifacts, they're not just expensive to create. They're not necessarily expensive to create. They're expensive to maintain. Think about every document you create as a child that you were bringing into the world. You know, children are fun at first. At the very earliest stages of making children, it's quite fun. And then everything after that is a slog. You got to make sure that you can't just say, okay, go on, run in the streets. You have to take care of them. You got to clothe them. You have to keep them safe, all that stuff. And that's expensive. That's why I only ended up having one kid. I thought, I came from a family of 6 children. I thought, I want 6 kids too. And my wife thought so at first until we had one. And then she reconsidered that whole deal. It was too hard to do even one, so we just stopped with the one. Now that he's grown up, I wish I'd had a whole bunch more of that model. But the thing is that you don't know when you have a kid that he's going to turn out so well, and you're going to want to have a whole bunch of clones of him. And I keep hearing from other parents who say, like, oh, our second child was so different from the first, so it's always a lottery. That's the thing about artifacts, is that they are a burden. Remember that artifacts get obsolete, they get out of date. So the more artifacts you're creating, the more of a maintenance problem you're creating for yourself. So if you do create artifacts, you've got to focus on maintainability of those artifacts. You need to make them as lean as you can make them, and I think you need to be ruthless about euthanizing them when they are no longer of service to society. And this is where my metaphor breaks down with parenting. Because I tell my son often, I said, I brought you into this world without your permission. I had no contract with you to bring you into this world. And I insist that you not leave the world. I am irrationally insistent on the fact that you can't die. I just feel this attachment to you, son. So because of that, I have to pay a penalty. The penalty I pay is everything that belongs to me, I give to my son. And I tell him, you have everything. That's my penalty, because otherwise it's immoral that I brought you into this world, unless I give you all of my resources. That's another reason why I can only have one child, so I don't have to choose which resources to give to which child. My son just gets everything. And I think the problem is that too many people neglect their documents, and they don't realize that those documents and those artifacts become a hazard to the future. And you've got to take care to not have them be a hazard to the future. And I've definitely seen many situations where people do not want to delete stuff even after we found out that it was useless. This is useless code. Well, we might need it someday. I worked so hard on it for so long. Let's just put it over here. No, we should delete it. We should delete it. It fooled us. No, I can't bring myself to do that. So I'm worried about that. So I try to get people to think about how do we make this lighter weight, these artifacts, and how do we encourage ourselves to be ruthless about culling them as the world changes and something that might have been useful at one point is no longer useful. But that means you've got to review this stuff on a regular basis. And I just keep seeing this problem where a new tester comes in, and I call it the magic oak tree syndrome. It comes from the previews, the trailer for the movie Pocahontas, the Disney movie Pocahontas. And somebody said, it's not an oak tree, it was a willow. Well, I'm going to say oak tree because that's what I thought it was, and I don't want to change it later. But I saw this cartoon Indian girl having a heart-to-heart talk with a magic tree. And my feeling was, I never saw the movie, so my feeling was, why would anyone ask for life advice from a tree that has literally no experience of the human world? Beyond what it can see with its magic eyes a few feet away. It doesn't know or care about the world of the humans. Why would anybody want advice from it? And then I realized what the answer to my question is. It's because it's a magic tree. Of course, it's a magic tree. You better listen to it. You would be worried that its magic will hurt you. You know something? You must know something. It's magic. And then I realized that that's exactly how testers who worked for me were thinking about a test suite that they had inherited. It's a magic test suite. It must be worth something, for it was bequeathed to me by the ancient ones. The ancient race of engineers that knew somehow to build this. We called those ancient ones interns. And the magical interns had wisdom lost to us today. And they told us that you have to run this test case. Who are we to gainsay them? And that leads to all kinds of terribleness. I remember there's this one test script, and I know where this test script came from because I was teaching a class and told everybody to write a test script in the class. And so each of us wrote test scripts. And one person wrote this. They said, click on this field and type the number 1,287 into this field. And then I asked, why 1,287? Why is that it wasn't the number 1,000. It was type 1,287 characters into the field. That's what it was. 1,287 characters. Why that number? You will never guess the reason. Because the reason is too stupid. If you try to guess the reason, you will assume that this person was thoughtful and reasonable about the decision. And so you will come up with lots of good things. You'll say, oh, maybe it was a limit. No, it wasn't a limit. Or maybe it was a value that users are likely to type in. No, it wasn't. It wasn't naturalistic data. Sometimes people say, well, maybe it was randomly chosen. It wasn't even randomly chosen. It was worse than random. What was it? What was it is that the tester had just slammed on the keyboard a whole bunch of times and then carefully counted how many times, how many characters. And so it was more expensive than random. You could have just said about 1,000 and not even bothered to type that in. So what happened is that the tester was under the misunderstanding that a test script is somehow a record of something that you had done before, rather than a message to the future about what is worth doing. So it's just a simple misunderstanding about the nature of testing. But the problem is what if you're on the receiving end of this? You go 1,287, that's awful specific. There must be a reason for that. And you'll give them the benefit of the doubt and you perpetuate this myth Because the magic oak tree has spoken. And you dare not say, really, what are your qualifications, oak tree, for telling me that this is what I should do with my life? I'm a human. You replicate through botanical processes. Come on. So, that's what I feel about artifacts. Beware of mystifying these things. Keep trying to demystify them. Keep asking yourself, is this a good set of artifacts? Because I definitely want you to create artifacts that are necessary to do your job. And I just want you to curate them. And take that curation seriously. And I hope that you put out some notes about your curation to guide the next person who comes along. But what's much more important than that is the next person who comes along should have been trained not to trust what you leave behind, to rethink it, to criticize it, and also to go find you if you're around and get you to explain it. And I think a better kind of documentation of any artifacts you leave around is a 10-minute video. A 10-minute video is going to take you about 10 minutes to create, and it's tremendously helpful. Because what you'd be leaving behind is like, okay, here's my directory structure, here's the things that I have on Jira, as you see, I've got this and this, and here's my Confluence page, and it's got this stuff. Now, those files are for this purpose, and the way that I use them is I check them out, and blah, 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 blah. A 10-minute introduction like that will be wonderful. It will probably help the person who comes after you to realize a sense of ownership of them, and then they will be able to make those tough decisions about what to perpetuate, what to delete, and all that sort of thing. And they won't have to just be like me, because I go into any tester's stuff, and my first thought is it's probably all worthless. Because probably the person who came before me wasn't a trained tester. They probably didn't take their job as seriously as I take my job. So it's a good first assumption that whatever this stuff was, I can create it myself, I can recreate it myself. Now I might be wrong, but my starting attitude is I'm probably going to throw your stuff away and make my own stuff anyway. And at the same time, I don't want to be too thoughtless about that because maybe you had some fantastic idea. That's only if I don't have a chance to talk to you, by the way. If I have a chance to talk to you, then it's a whole different thing. Then I can put on my respectful hat and say, tell me what you were thinking, help me understand this. I want to do honor to the work that you did and continue it in any respect that is helpful for us. So help me understand what you were doing here and what you were trying to cover. Then I would run into a second problem, which is you probably, and you look pretty smart to me, you look pretty serious, but I don't know very much about you other than backing up classes to make you look smart. I do that trick too, but most testers do not know how to talk about test strategy, and if I ask them about their test strategy, they'll get all defensive. What are you implying? What do you mean, what is my test strategy? What do you mean, what are my oracles? What do you mean by oracles? I don't use that word. Coverage? You mean code coverage? I don't know about coverage. No one's ever asked me that before. That's a lot. I get that a lot. No one's ever asked me about test strategy before. How dare you ask me about it? So I'm like, oh, okay, then stay silent, and I'll just investigate your work like it's a piece of archaeology, and I'll figure out what your test coverage is. I'll figure out what your test strategy was. I'll figure out what your test oracles were. But if you would like to tell me about this, if you would like to have a bit of an argument about it, then I hope that you will. But that does take training, and a lot of people don't have that training. In this world of ours, it is rare, I find, for a tester to be really challenged about their testing decisions. Instead, what the developers and designers are going to ask you about is they're going to say, how many test cases do you have? How many test cases? Do you have your test cases? Did you write your test cases? Are they automated? Are they automated? Those are the questions you get. You don't get like, well, but how did you decide that those were the right test data to use? What was your principle for deciding that you had sufficient functional data, platform, and structural coverage? Walk me through your thinking. that kind of stuff is, you're not going to get those kinds of questions except someone who's a super enthusiast for software testing. So that's one of the issues. We have to help elevate each other's ability to talk about this stuff. And then the artifacts that you create or leave behind will be more valuable because you will be able to leave behind a better description of them that will help other craftsmen to continue your work instead of doubting it so much that they defensively delete it because they don't want to be harmed by it, and then they don't get whatever the value was from it. Yes?
You mentioned the drastic and horrible words test coverage.
Yes.
How do you measure your test coverage?
Well, first of all, I better define test coverage. Test coverage is how thoroughly I have examined the product with respect to some model of that product. And that means there's 100 different kinds of coverage. So for any way of modeling the product, there's a test coverage. We can talk about state coverage. State coverage is how thoroughly I've examined the product with respect to some state model. Requirements coverage is how thoroughly I've examined the product with respect to some model of the requirements, which is usually a list of requirements or a set of stories or something like that. Risk coverage would be how thoroughly I've examined the product with respect to some model of technical risks, product risks, such as performance risk, the risk that it will perform all kinds of coverage. And most people, when you think coverage, they think of one of two things. They think of functional coverage, which means I have a list of functions, a list of things the product can do, and I test each one. Or they think of code coverage. Now, code coverage, I used to say, I've done a lot of work with code coverage, I used to say there's only one thing that you can ever get out of code coverage. Recently, I met a young guy who taught me a second thing. So now there are two things that I can get from a measure of code coverage. I became convinced by his argument. Damn it. There's a part of me that enjoys learning, and there's a part that hates the fact that some kid in his 20s is going to teach me something new about testing, but he did, and I accept that. The two things that I can get from code coverage is, if you told me that you have 80% coverage, what that tells me is 0 about what you've tested. 80%, I don't care. What I'm interested in is that you didn't touch 20%. What was the 20% that you haven't even looked at? That is interesting. Now, the 80% you might have looked at, but you had your eyes closed while you were looking. You could have ignored all the bugs. I mean, I have no idea when you say you tested 80% of the code, whether you found the bugs that were in that 80% or not, we don't know. Okay, but that 20% that's black hole for us, we don't know anything about that. Let's focus on that to find out why. Usually it's because it's error handling code for very weird, rare situations. Maybe we don't need to cover it. Now, what this kid taught me is he said, oh yeah, James, I hear you, but there's one other thing I get from that number. He said, when I hear that something is, say, 90% covered in the code, what that tells me is they must have instrumented that code with unit tests that are achieving that coverage. And that tells me that if I have more unit tests that I think of adding, it'll be easy to add them because the infrastructure is already there. But if there's only 10% coverage, I have learned to groan. Because it means that if I want to increase that from 10%, I probably have to go in and deal with some kind of terrible infrastructure issue or structural testability issue. I'm going to have to create a new kind of framework or refactor the code or something. There's probably a big mess in there, which is why it's 10%. And I became convinced by that argument. But that actually makes a lot of sense to me. I can imagine that low code coverage numbers may imply that achieving higher coverage means we're going to have to do a lot of work. Otherwise, the number would already be high. So that's cool. So that's two things that I can do with that number. But people who think that, I've got 100% statement coverage, that means I've tested the product well. No, you haven't. Because of data coverage. Because of oracles. I keep using the word oracle, just to make sure you know what I'm talking about. A test oracle is the means by which you recognize a bug. Coverage only talks about what you've examined, but you can examine something with an empty head and closed eyes and not see above that's right in front of you. Your oracle is your ability to see above, to recognize a bug that is happening right in front of you. Right? So if you have no oracles, you literally can never see a bug. And if you have ever seen a bug, you must have had an oracle, or you wouldn't have recognized it as a bug. It would just have been a thing. This thing happened, but you don't know it's a bad thing unless you have an oracle. So you have to have a nice, healthy set of oracles in order to detect the bugs that you are actually seeing. And you need to examine the products so that you see them in the first place. So coverage and oracles go together. And so that's how I think about coverage. And I teach people that the key to coverage is modeling. In fact, that's the key to testing. The entire core of software testing is models, mental models. You cannot test something intentionally that goes beyond your model of it. You can do it accidentally. You can have a limited model of something, and then you accidentally discover something that changes your view of what this thing is. So it can happen accidentally. But you can't set out to say, I'm going to test this, and this, and this, unless you have an internal mental model of it that allows you to recognize this, and this, and this. If that is not recognized, you will not set out to do that. Okay? So this is why when you read John Locke, if you want to go back into history, read John Locke on the subject of tabula rasa, about how the fact that every child is born with a blank slate, and that blank slate of a child is programmed like an empty computer is programmed with all of the things that it's told and all the things that it sees. That's what John Locke thought. John Locke had a very simplistic model of a human mind. Today we know that humans are born already knowing a whole bunch of things about physics. They tested newborn babies. They tested newborn babies and shown that when you show a newborn baby a physically impossible action, its eyes dilate in a way that don't dilate if you show it something where the ball is following a normal ballistic pathway and doesn't disappear behind a curtain. So our brains are not blank slates. They're born with a whole bunch of biases. We have a better mental model now about how children learn than we once did. So this is what you're doing when you're testing. You are developing in your mind, you are constructing a mental model of the product as fast as you can. Testing is all about learning, and you're in a learning race. You have to learn as fast as you can everything important about a product in order to test it properly. And that goes right back to coverage, because in every dimension of coverage, it's going to be some way that you've modeled the product. So if you're testing something that's very state heavy, then you realize, maybe I should systematically cover the states instead of incidentally covering. That's a big difference. Systematic versus incidental. This is a choice that you all are making when you're testing. I'm going to automatically cover the states of a product, even if I don't try, to some degree. Do I really need to systematically think that through, or will I just automatically do it without even trying? These are the decisions I'm making, decisions about how to use my energy to intentionally cover versus incidentally or unintentionally or accidentally covering the product. So I know I'm doing this. Maybe up to now you haven't thought about it this way, and I've just raised that issue in your mind, which is the beginning of a process of you creating a better mental model about their process of testing. Maybe this is the first time that anyone's ever told you that modeling, mental models, are the core of testing. And right now you're thinking, really, I never would have thought of that. I thought the core of testing was test cases, or the core of testing is seeing, or the core of testing is exploring, or so many different ways you could say what the core of testing was. The first time anyone said that modeling is that, what is modeling? And now your brain is starting to work on that problem. And if your brain does work on that problem, you'll find there's a bunch of books out there about modeling. There's books about general systems thinking, which is all about general mental models. I would encourage you to look into that. There are books about formal modeling. There's entire books about specific kinds of formal modeling. There's only one testing book I know of that actually says the core of all testing is modeling, and that every chapter is a different way to model the product and base testing on that. It's a book written by this Swedish guy who came to one of my classes, and I talked him into this, and then he ended up writing his book about that. So I feel really good about that. But not many people know about this fellow's book on test design. So there's a mental model in your head about what testing is, and that controls what you think you need to learn about. If you thought the core of testing was be like a user, then of course you're going to think learning all about users makes me a great tester. And what I would rather have you think of is modeling makes you a great tester. And one kind of modeling is to make a mental model of users, because that's one important kind of testing. But this is a more general approach to thinking about testing, to center it on modeling rather than centering it on user knowledge. Because now there can be lots of slots in your mind for every different kind of model. Flow models, data models, platform models, usage models, lots and lots of different ways we can think about the product. And every single one of them we can find risk there, and then we can examine the product, and then someone can say, how can you tell me that your testing is any good? And you immediately launch into all the ways you model the product. With respect to users, here's how I thought about the users. With respect to data, here's how I thought about the data. With respect to components of the product, here's how I thought about the components. With respect to code, this is how I thought about the code. And the person you're talking to goes, whoa, whoa, you are obviously a super testing geek. And instead of engaging you in conversation, I'm just going to believe you from now on. That's a lot of how I get my reputation, by the way. I go into situations like this, and people just assume, you've never seen me test. You just assume I know something about testing, because I'll talk about it and talk about it. Although some of you should be thinking and are thinking, he talks good. Can you actually do it? Which is why I love to do testing demonstrations, because I feel that in me too. That, talking is one thing. I used to think that talking well about something meant that you can do it, and I found that that is not true. It might seem obvious to you. It wasn't obvious to me until I witnessed one person who couldn't talk about testing, and I hired her anyway because she was charming. That's how she got the job, is she didn't yell at me during the interview, and the other people did. So she was compliant during the interview, and I thought, well, at least if I keep badgering her about things, she won't bite my head off, so there's that. So I guess I'll teach her how to test. So then I started testing, and it turned out she had some kind of alien tester thing growing inside her that burst out of her and tested everything to the bejesus. And then I said, how did you find that bug? And she would go, I don't know, I just look at the product, I find the bug. And then she finds some other bug no one else finds. Like, how did you find that? I don't know. You see the bug, you look at the product. So I had to sit next to this lady, Albina Kurtsina was her name, from Russia, and barely spoke English. I had to sit next to her and just watch her test, and then I put words to her testing. Words that she didn't know how to say, but I said, oh, you're doing this kind of thing, you're doing that kind of thing. I'm like, oh, I just got a test. And I almost hired a guy who wrote a book about testing. And at the last moment in the interview, I just said, oh, sit down and test this for me. And he froze. He couldn't do anything. I mean, it's one thing to not think about many things. It's another thing to stare at a computer for 20 minutes and not touch anything. Even when someone's going like, hey, try to test. He's sitting staring. He just melted down right in front of me and then left. And then the day later, he's like, oh, I don't know what happened. I'm like, I know what happened. You don't know how to test. You wrote a bunch of words, you told me the words, I almost believed you on a test, but I mean, you've got to be able to do it, man. To sit down and do it. And I think some people, if they can't do the best possible thing, they don't want to do anything. So I think that was the problem he had. He didn't know what the best possible thing to do would be, and he didn't believe that he could just try something and work from there. I think that's what happened. That was my theory. But those two incidents convinced me that the world of talking and the world of doing have an interesting connection, but it is possible to be in one and not in the other. So I am painfully aware that I'm great at talking about testing. And so I have my friends, my collegial network, challenges me to do testing, and now I have slide sets where I walk you step by step through an actual testing process. I've done testing videos where I broke down the video in 2-second increments. I have one video, a 7-minute video of testing. And every 2 seconds, I have cataloged exactly what we were doing in that video, me and this other guy. And we've cataloged every single little technique, every single thought that we had. I think studies like that you can do once in a while at your own workstation to help yourself understand what you really are doing when you are testing. And it helped me to feel like, hey, I actually do this stuff. I'm not just talking about it. But you guys probably have lots of daily experience that I'm not getting these days. I feel like a rat that I get a little crumb of experience here and there from my clients. But nobody pays me to do day in and day out testing anymore. I only do it for free, and only when I have a colleague who has some testing problem, and then we turn it into a talk or we turn it into a class. So I'm not getting as much experience as I want from the situations yet.
Really sorry.
All right, okay. Thank you for keeping time, and thank you for letting me be here and rant the way that I have been allowed to rant. I feel really good. I feel super energized, and I hope it has been helpful to you. Feel free to email me or Skype me. My Skype ID is Satisfice. I love Skyping with Pinball, having conversations about this. You go ahead and challenge me, and maybe I'll end up